Welcome to the Week 16 edition of the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I am here for the first time since doing this podcast in person with my younger brother Carson.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a momentous occasion.
Across the table from each other, we can look at each other in the eyes.
Yeah.
Start laughing weirdly in weird moments like right now.
Yeah.
And
as no one laughs.
Yeah, I guess I'll just start with I'm disappointed, lost in the semis in our main fantasy football league. The lowest score I've had all season. I went on a 6-game win streak. I was 4-4, ended 10-4 for the regular season, just to have a horrible performance in the semifinals. So it's sad, but hopefully we can help the people that are still playing for something.
Yeah, I'll say this. Carson had a good team, and a lot of people in Week 15, if you had a good team, you probably lost because there were a lot of talent, like star talent players.
Yeah.
That just completely underperformed, just crapped the bed, did not show up for you in your fantasy playoff matchup. So hopefully you use a 2-week format and maybe you can bounce back because, I mean, it hit the whole league in a lot of ways. I saw that it was the lowest number of touchdowns on a Sunday since like 1994.
Wow. I mean, a few games were postponed, but still.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a pretty uneventful weekend.
It was. I mean, you got people like Russell Gage getting 20+ from my opponent. So, I mean, that's just the type of week it is. I mean, he's had a few good weeks lately, but come on, really? So, yeah, we can move on, jump into the first game. 49ers-Titans. I would say look out for Elijah Mitchell, but he's already been ruled out. He hasn't played in a few weeks. He'd been getting a ton of carries, but you'll be without him. So it'll be interesting to see if they use Debo running a lot because in this past game he had 6 rushes for 29 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions on 60 yards for 18.9 points. So that's good. But something that's not good is Brandon Ayuk had 1 reception for 36 yards. And then Kittle still did his thing, not like his past 2-week performances, but 6 receptions for 93 yards. You're still happy with that. But Brandon Ayuk, 4.6 points. Is there enough left over in the passing game for Ayuk if Debo and Kittle just do their thing?
Yeah, we've seen it from him. I was actually pulling up Jeff Wilson's stats because you did not include them in the notes.
Yeah.
I want to mention him real quick. He's a good pickup.
He was just kind of mediocre last week.
Last week as in Week 15?
Yeah.
19.9 fantasy points is mediocre to you?
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, 21 carries, 110 yards, 1 touchdown.
What did he do in Week 14?
5.5.
Oh, that's what messed up because it was a longer week and I was doing this. It was showing last, and I thought it was Week 15, but it was showing Week 14 because of the extended window.
Week 15, it was like Groundhog Day. It never ended.
Yeah, because of those Tuesday games. Okay, yeah, so Jeff Wilson would be a great fill-in for Elijah Mitchell, seeing as what he did in Week 15. And it's not like an amazing matchup for him, though, because this Titans defense ranks 20th in passing yards allowed per game, so that's pretty good. But this is a rushing offense, and this Titans defense ranks 2nd in rushing yards allowed per game at 86.9.
Well, yeah, we watched in Week 15 how Najee Harris got shut down by them. I mean, 4.5 fantasy points. That's his worst total as an NFL pro. Yeah,
so Jeff Wilson's definitely worth adding. But
yeah, he's available in a little over 50% of leagues. So definitely be on the lookout for him, although you don't like the matchup. So honestly, I think it's probably better off to have him, even if you have to keep him on your bench, just so that your opponent doesn't use him against you.
That's true. That is a good strategy. We can move on to Titans to kind of a shorter list of players. Deonta Foreman, 22 carries for 108 rushing yards, 2 receptions, 27 yards. He kind of had an ankle injury during the game, but he seems to be completely fine off that. This is his second 100-plus rushing yard game this season, so you really like to see that. I think he's reliable. Do you have similar confidence level in him?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about him. 49ers defense can be tough, and even in a good game, like his fantasy ceiling is still, it still hasn't reached the high teens really. So I think you kind of know what you're getting from him at this point.
Yeah.
Obviously, a touchdown changes that pretty significantly, but I think he's a serviceable flex, and we can move on to the pass catchers if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm only going to talk about A.J. Brown. Just monitor his injury status with his chest. He's come off of IR, could play this Thursday. But what's your confidence level if he plays? Because there hasn't been a reliable option besides him, and even he has been unreliable this season. So what's your confidence level?
He has been, but I think if you're starting a Titans pass catcher, it's going to be AJ Brown.
Yeah.
I have him on a roster. I roster him, and I will be starting him.
Yeah.
I think he's at least flex worthy, because even in the games where he wasn't great, he was still, high single digits, which is kind of, obviously not what you expect from him. But when you do get what you expect from him, it's mid-teens, or he's got a couple games here, 27 points in week 7, 31.5 in week 8. So he's had moments of what we saw from him last year to kind of influence his draft position for this season.
Yeah. So, you're probably confident enough to start him, but disappointing for what you drafted him at for sure.
Well, and the other thing too is if you bench him and then he goes off, you know.
And he has this season. Yeah. He's done it.
So I think if you have him, you're probably rolling him out there. Obviously, you may have other options because he has been unavailable for a while and he has been underperforming for most of the year. So just monitor that as the week progresses.
Yeah, and as Blake said, not a great matchup. San Francisco ranks 6th in total yards allowed per game, so pretty strong defense. We can move on to the first Christmas Day matchup, and that is Browns-Packers. Nick Chubb had 23 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown. 1 reception for 2 yards as well. So that was good for people that had him in their lineups. Kareem Hunt, who was on the COVID list, but I think is being taken off of it. But the coach says it's highly unlikely for him to be available against the Packers. Is that because of COVID or because of an injury that's still lingering?
He said regardless of COVID protocols, it's unlikely. So it's based on the injury.
Okay. Yeah, and he's only played 2 games since Week 6, and you wouldn't feel great about this because the 2 games he's played besides Week 6 are the Ravens twice, so that hasn't been a great sample size, but probably don't even have to worry about him. And if he's not there, I think you still feel good about Chubb. And then Jarvis Landry, who was on the COVID list, but I think is expected to be available. Double-digit fantasy points in the past 3 games he's played. So I'll ask you, does Landry's de facto wide receiver status because of no OBJ in this offense keep him reliable enough to at least be a flex?
A low-end flex, I would say. It's still Baker Mayfield or someone else throwing the football.
Yeah.
So you don't feel great about that. He's had some good totals lately, but it has, one of them was on a rushing touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown that game. Otherwise, good amount of targets. But yeah, there really hasn't been a very reliable Browns pass catcher this season. We've seen what OBJ's done with the Rams now, and how he's kind of looking over at Cleveland like, hey, I have just as many touchdowns here in the last 3 weeks as I did the entire time I was a Brown.
Yeah, other than his Week 15 performance. We'll talk about that later, though. But yeah, he has been better generally. But yeah, not a great matchup. Green Bay defense ranks 8th in total yards allowed per game, so pretty strong defense. We can talk about the Packers. First team to clinch a playoff spot, right? They clinched their division, so I think they're the first team to clinch a playoff spot. So
sounds right to me.
That's interesting. So Aaron Rodgers had a good game, 23.82 fantasy points, looking like his last season self. Maybe not all of his last season self.
Yeah, MVP Rodgers.
Yeah, but he's looking good again, and there was a point in the season where he wasn't looking amazing, but he's reliable. But Monar's injury status, still dealing with his toe injury, I guess, or is he completely fine?
Well, I'm shaking my head because the toe injury is not going to keep him out.
Yeah,
it's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to play.
That's been listed for 3 weeks or so.
Yeah,
so.
He's got COVID toe.
He's got COVID toe. So,
it's probably going to linger for the remainder of the season. It'll probably be something that he. I don't know if there's going to be surgery involved in the offseason. That's pure speculation. But I think it's not going to keep him out of any games based on that alone.
Yeah. All right. Aaron Jones, 13 carries, 58 yards, 2 receptions, 12 yards, and a touchdown, which allowed him to have 15 fantasy points. Monitor his injury status because of his knee, I guess he's dealing with. But back-to-back games saved by touchdowns as far as his fantasy points are concerned. But do you expect him to regress to his lack of volume, I guess I should say?
Meaning his fantasy production?
Yeah.
It kind of comes down to the way that they use him. It's clearly a committee. We've talked about it for the past few weeks, how they view it as a kind of a 1-2 punch there. And it's a strong committee too. AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones, they're a few dynamic duos at running back. I mean, there's a handful, but that's a strong contender for number one. That being said, you do like in PPR formats how Aaron Jones seems to be getting more of that usage in this offense, and especially with, Marquez Valdes-Scantling placed on the COVID list, so that's one less person to, theoretically compete with for catches. That should help Jones get more involved. Remember earlier in the season when Davante Adams was unavailable and they had like one healthy pass catcher, Jones racked up quite a few number of catches in that game and had very few rushes. So I think they're using him in a dynamic way, and it's going to allow him to keep having some success, but not to the amount that you would hope for from an RB1.
Yeah, I agree. Let me know if do you think this is too rash? Is A.J. Dillon just completely unusable if Aaron Jones is there? Because he had a touchdown and only had 10.5 points. And I didn't write down his week 14 totals, but it was mediocre.
You think you have to be kind of desperate to use him when Aaron Jones is available. This is actually kind of a unique thing, this stat line, because as we've seen since Aaron Jones' return, that A.J. Dillon has actually been out carrying Jones in most games.
Yeah.
So
in this game, Jones out-carried him and out-received him only by one catch, but still.
Yeah, so maybe this is a step in the right direction in terms of Jones having an edge in the committee, but that's kind of something you have to wait and see. Dillon has had kind of standalone value recently. Maybe that's going away, but it's difficult to say at this point.
Yeah. And then Davante Adams under his bar, which is a really high bar, but still did his thing. But I'll ask you, between Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which keep an eye on him because he was added to the COVID list on Tuesday, and Allen Lazard, MVS had 20.8 fantasy points in Week 15, whereas Lazard had 20.9 in Week 14. So who would you rather roster? I know someone in our league had MVS and dropped him for Lazard, and then that kind of burned him both times because they alternated. But who would you rather have?
I think we've seen more from Valdes-Scantling this season than Lazard. Lazard was he was hot at the beginning of last season
as a rookie, right?
Yeah,
I think so.
Maybe. But I remember because I kept him in my IR slot for like most of that year, and then when he came back, he was nothing special.
Yeah.
It's clearly Davante Adams, and then it's a pretty steep drop off after that. So you're kind of picking at scraps. I think MVS we've seen more from him this season, so I'd go with him.
Yeah. All right. Not a great matchup. Browns defense ranks 5th in total yards allowed per game, so another test for this Packers offense. But we can move on to the next Christmas matchup and the last one. Colts-Cardinals. Jonathan Taylor against your Patriots. I had that game on because, I'll just skip to this. Saw Michael Pittman get ejected and get 1.7 fantasy points for me. Wasn't happy starting him because I knew it wasn't a great matchup, but
I told you to lower expectations. It shouldn't have been that low, but that was
I would have been better off starting Bourne and Jacoby Myers, but I wasn't going to feel very great about doing that. So, but that was really the only other option I had.
The stat that Wentz only completed 5 passes the entire game is pretty amazing.
I think it was 5 different people too, so the best they had is one catch. Do you expect Pittman to bounce back? He'll do better than that. I feel like I can bet on that.
If we watched the Detroit Lions kind of put it to the Cardinals, so I think that I feel better about Pittman than pretty much anyone on that roster. Amon-Ra is kind of coming on late, but Pittman's a proven asset at this point in the fantasy season. It was a bad matchup. I said that in last week's episode. I feel better about how he'll do against the Cardinals this week.
Yeah, and I read that that game-sealing Jonathan Taylor run was the fastest recorded speed of a ball carrier this season, so they keep on getting faster and faster week by week, I guess. Didn't look fast in that Derrick Henry run. That Derrick Henry run against the Bills still looks the fastest to me, but I guess not.
Bigger frame.
Yeah, I guess. And the Cardinals defense is easier to rush against, ranking 17th, but 5th in passing yards allowed per game. So I don't expect Taylor. The matchup doesn't matter.
I think. So a lot of his yards came on that final play where he got the touchdown.
They did. He really didn't have a lot of points before that play.
Yeah. I want to say that was like a 13-point play.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question going into that week was if the New England defense could hold him under 100 rushing yards, and they almost did.
Yeah.
But 29 carries, and with how talented he is, it's really difficult to keep him down. I think that we watched Craig Reynolds run for over 100 yards, so just think what Jonathan Taylor will do.
Yeah, that is true. We'll talk about him later, but he can move on to the Cardinals. Disappointment. I mean, Kyler Murray, 12.58 fantasy points. I expect him to bounce back. That's all I can really say about him. James Conner, 9 points. Edmonds, 5.3 points. Monitor James Conner's injury status. He's dealing with a heel injury, but with Edmonds and Conner, do you expect this backfield to bounce back, or can you not trust either of them?
Well, I mean, we've seen throughout the year, like, James Conner has a lot of touchdowns when Chase Edmonds was healthy.
Yeah.
So you feel better about Conner from that perspective than Edmonds rest of season, like if they both remain healthy. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to start benching Conner based on this performance. If we were to analyze all the players that underperformed in Week 15, you'd have no players on your roster.
Yeah.
For Week 16. So
that's true.
I think it was a fluke week, and I'm not losing faith in Conner. Edmonds, I'm just not as high on in general, but I think he can be okay, especially in a game like this where they may be behind.
All right, I agree. Christian Kirk had 9 receptions for 94 yards and a touchdown for 24.4 fantasy points. AJ Green had 4 receptions for 64 yards, and Ertz had 6 receptions for 74 yards. So has Kirk proven he's the best receiving option? I think when I asked you that last week, I think Kirk was your pick to rise out of all the pass catchers. Don't remember that exactly. But do you think that this is true for the rest of the regular season for how the pass catchers will be in this offense?
I think that Kirk has the most boom games among Cardinals pass catchers without Hopkins present.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've talked about it all year long. It can be anyone week to week. So
it seems like they have a more reliable floor though, with Hopkins at least being out. I mean, all 3 of the guys I named had double-digit fantasy points.
Sure.
In a game that they did very poorly in.
Yeah, I mean it's a good amount of targets that will be diversified among more talented pass catchers.
Yeah.
So, not to say that those guys are more talented than Hopkins, but like in terms of next man up.
Remember, like after the first 4 weeks, and it was like Rondale Moore leading the statistics, and now he's just completely gone as far as like fantasy is concerned. Like I know he's definitely still involved as far as a team is concerned in the NFL, but not really.
They haven't been using him the same way as they did at the beginning.
Not the same way for sure.
Yeah.
And the Colts defense, middle of the road. So, I mean, should have been a good matchup last week, but I would expect the people that you have been relying on in this offense to bounce back.
Yeah, if they drop 3 straight, then it's going to be panic time in Arizona.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we can move on to the first Sunday matchup, Lions-Falcons. Whoa, great matchup right there. I can't believe the Falcons are like 7-7, 6-8. Like, I was surprised that they even had that many wins.
Yeah.
And the Lions they're getting it going, it seems. And I can't believe it.
They're just trying to
not have the first pick next year.
Right. They're trying to sabotage their draft for next year.
Yeah, honestly. Props to them for trying, though. It probably is. I mean, they're professional athletes. They're not going to just lay there and die.
I guess so.
DeAndre Swift, he's been injured. Monitors injury status. I guess there's a chance. Shoulder injury.
Yeah, we've talked about what we think in terms of his career. That
doesn't
he
make
should,
much sense.
Yeah, I mean they should stop winning games. They should really rest their proven talent and hang it up. But it's a first year head coach, so it's difficult to give up on him in that regard.
Yeah.
So I get it, but. Yeah, we're going to have to continue to monitor until there is a definitive decision made on DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, and then Jamal Williams reinstated from the COVID list on Monday, but Craig Reynolds, 26 carries for 112 rushing yards, 1 catch for 5 yards. What do you make of this performance by Reynolds? Because I guess against the Broncos, I think he had like 70+ rushing yards. He had another good game, not 100.
I feel like it was, yeah.
It was a good game.
I'm going to look that up, but I think that, he seems like a player that's really emerging. He had 83 rushing yards.
Yeah, I read his story. Like,
on 11 carries.
His only college offer was like a D2 school, and he was undrafted. I think 7 different practice squads. Apparently, the team calls him Netflix because he just came off the couch. Like, it's so funny.
Yeah, I heard about that too. It's cool. I think he seems really good. I mean, it's weird that he's just kind of emerging now, but yeah. I think it has something to do with the opportunity that he's been provided, given Williams and Swift being unavailable. They must be liking what they're seeing in practice from him, and it's showing on the field on Sundays. So, yeah, he's a fun player to watch right now.
Yeah. All right, we can move on to Amon-Ra St. Brown, my DFS guy last week. Like what he did for my team. He had 23.5 fantasy points. Is he legit? I think he is.
Double-digit targets in 3 straight games, I want to say.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the trouble is Jared Goff, but he's been playing better as of late.
Yeah, he has been playing better.
So, I mean, that's the limiting thing, is the quarterback. So if Goff can stay competent, I think St. Brown can have a pretty good role, and it's difficult to really
get excited about a Lions player.
Well, I mean,
besides Swift,
just because of Goff, yeah. I mean, like, I think that this recent stretch has been more of an anomaly than more of what we can expect moving forward. So, ride the wave, but you might crash hard. If you roll with St. Brown.
That is true. Josh Reynolds, though, had 6 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown. He's averaging roughly 13.5 fantasy points in the past 4 games he's played. Is he worth adding? He's rostered in 3.1% of leagues. Or is there enough to go around?
I would say refer to my last statement about St. Brown. We're talking about the same stretch of games where St. Brown's come on.
Yeah. You obviously feel more confident in St. Brown.
Yeah, you can ride the wave. These are good. These are really good DFS guys, more so than fantasy. That's because the consequences of putting a player like this that is on a hot streak going into your fantasy playoffs or continuing through your fantasy playoffs is a little bit more risky than a DFS where you can make it up elsewhere.
Yeah, that is true. But that's a good matchup. The Falcons defense ranks 26 in total yards allowed per game and 30th in NFL points allowed per game. So who knows? The Lions could maybe get another win. Yeah. You never know. I mean, they just beat the Cardinals.
Drop their draft stock even lower.
Yeah. We can move on to the Falcons. Cordell Patterson, 11 carries for 18 yards and 2 receptions for 5 yards. Good for 4.3 fantasy points. And I know he's been struggling lately. I don't know his totals from the past few weeks, but I think back-to-back single-digit performances are close to it. But
yeah, I think he was a double-digit, but just barely.
Yeah.
I'm pulling that up right now.
How worried are you about him as you're looking that up?
At San Francisco, we just read those stats. He got 4.3 fantasy points. The 3 weeks prior in descending order, so 14, 13, 12, he had 13.9 in week 14, 12.6 points, and then 27.5.
There he is.
I think that's more of the San Francisco defense than a panic around Cordell Patterson. I mean, he's been a double-digit scorer in every other game this year except for 2.
Yeah, you can't bench him.
No, and especially against Detroit, I think this guy is going to be popular in DFS. I think he's going to be popular back on rosters if you survived the first round of the playoffs. It's really week 17 and 18 at Buffalo and then New Orleans that kind of scare you based on those defenses. But, I mean, based on his receiving usage, because, he came into the league as a receiver, he still has that upside. So we haven't seen that much lately. His reception totals have been lower than earlier in the season, but his rushing totals have been up. So there's a balance to how they're using him, and I think that Patterson bounces back this week.
Yeah, Russell Gage, your favorite player, maybe next to Zach Wilson, 8 receptions for 91.
That's harsh for Gage.
Yards and a touchdown. Yeah, that's true. But 23.1 fantasy points is he legit? Is he worth? Can you trust him? I mean, he had a few nasty snags in the last week's performance. I saw that he had against me.
I mean, this may be a bad hill to die on, but I'm still sour about how he performed for me when I picked him up back in week 10.
Yeah,
0 catches. So
that's Ridley's fill-in for you, basically.
Correct. Something like that.
I don't think you would have played him if Ridley was there.
No, that's right, yeah. But I feel like Ridley was gone before week 10. Either way. He has been performing pretty well lately. I'll give him that. I think it's a hill that I gotta die on. Other people can pick him up and roll the dice with him. I don't really buy it. We still have yet to see Kyle Pitts emerge.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're waiting on. This guy's got, last week he had 4 catches for 77 yards. He should be getting more catches than that. I just don't understand why the guy that seems a lot more talented than Gage is not putting up the numbers that Gage has.
Yeah, I'll talk about Pitts for a second. Another mediocre fantasy performance. But I remember going in the season, a lot of fantasy analysts I was listening to were saying, don't draft Pitts too highly. Tight ends always progress and mature in the league way slower than any other skill position. And they were just saying things like, Rob Gronkowski, it would seem like a low bar statistically, and they're like, Rob Gronkowski is the only person to ever do it this early in his career, as a rookie. It usually takes 3 or 4 years. And apparently he's the first rookie tight end to have 800 receiving yards in a very long time. So he's doing amazing for a tight end as a rookie, but that just shows you that they usually don't have that great of rookie performances.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his game log here. He has 1 touchdown on the season, and it came in week 5 before their week 6 bye. Hasn't scored a touchdown since then, and really hasn't gotten above 60 receiving yards besides last week since week 10. So
I think he's legit. I think he'll have a good career, but I guess that's right. As far as fantasy is concerned, I don't think you can ever trust a rookie tight end.
Yeah,
for whatever reason.
Maybe that's the takeaway here. And of course, that's hindsight speaking. But for next year, I have no idea right now what the tight end draft class looks like. But keep that in the back of your mind when you're drafting.
Yeah, and then Lions defense relatively weak, but I mean we saw what they did against the Cardinals. So I guess take that. Grain of salt.
They're playing scrappy football, biting kneecaps.
Yeah. We can move on to Rams-Vikings.
Yeah, this should be a fun game.
Yes, a shootout, I would think. Matthew Stafford didn't really capitalize on his matchup against the Seahawks last week, 15.46 fantasy points.
We say last week, but it was just yesterday when we're recording this.
It was just yesterday. That is true. So Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel. So 6 carries for Henderson, 18 for Michel. It's just them slowly re-emerging him into the offense.
Reintegrating, yeah. He's being reintegrated from his quad injury, from his time on the COVID list.
And Michel's getting it done.
Yeah, Michel.
As a rusher.
Sony Michel is a competent running back. He is not very exciting. Not great in the passing game. As we saw last week, week 14, where he had no receptions. But, it's a tough time if you have been riding Henderson's coattails this season, because he has been pretty solid based on where you drafted him especially. Yeah. But it's becoming more of a committee. I think even when Henderson's fully healthy, I think it's going to be more of a split than it has been earlier in the season.
Yeah.
Just based on how Michel has filled in against various opponents. And
with them being a Super Bowl contender, I mean, why would they rush him back in? They're probably going to be happy to do a committee if it works.
Yeah, that's a lot of Super Bowl teams usually feature a committee at running back. So totally makes sense for them to transition to that, but it's unfortunate for the individual values of those players.
Yeah, Cooper Kupp, who my opponent had. I looked at our... we can maybe
he's the most rostered player on fantasy or on playoff teams, like fantasy playoff teams.
That makes sense because of where you drafted him too, and him just being the fantasy MVP. And maybe we can do like an episode at the end of the season where we look back on our draft. But I was looking at some of the wide receivers taken around him. Like Brandon Ayuk was one pick after him. Yeah. And I was looking at like all of Ani, someone who's in our league. Mm-hmm. He took Ayuk a pick after him. That's not even crazy. He drafted Allen Robinson before him. He drafted A.J. Brown before him, both guys that were definitely being drafted before him. And it's just crazy to think, like, how you could have gotten screwed and how lucky. This is more of the takeaway. How lucky you were to get Kupp. Where you got him.
Yeah. If you're thrilled with where you got Kupp.
Yeah. I drafted Woods before him, but that was a common thing too.
So, yeah. I mean, ADP is an interesting thing.
There's always one player like this, but this is like This is more than I've ever seen as far as someone who just is the MVP and was drafted as like a wide receiver 2.
Yeah, you can look at ADP at the end of a season and think, what if this, what if that? But I think the thing to take away from it is moving into next year, focus on those players that did emerge and did play really well. I mean, Cooper Kupp is going to be a lot higher drafted next year, and probably won't reach these heights next year just because.
Yeah,
it's just regression. So
I mean, what was Michael Thomas's season after the record-breaking reception? Has he had a full season?
I think he got injured. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm not saying that's in Kupp's future.
Yeah, that's not the best comparison, but it's
recent one.
He's riding extremely high, and it's very hard to sustain that. So
yeah,
be happy you have him, and we'll let's move on.
Yeah, all right. But Odell, 1 reception for 7 yards. Van Jefferson, 2 receptions for 23 yards, and 1 carry for 10 yards. And I'll just say this right away: this is a good matchup against the Vikings, ranking 30th in total yards allowed per game and 23rd in points against per game. I think they rank last in fantasy points they allow with wide receivers, but. I mean, who do you like more between Odell and Jefferson? I think I might probably have asked you this question before, but...
Recently, I would say OBJ.
Yeah.
Because he's been getting more catches, and Jefferson's been getting long touchdowns.
Yeah.
You can't really count on that week after week, although we did have a stretch where that's exactly what he was doing week after week.
3-week stretch, I think.
But yeah, OBJ seems to have kind of slid into that number 2 wide receiver spot. I would say the bigger takeaway from week 15... in regards to the Rams was that it was just kind of a slower paced game. It wasn't. I mean, the final score was 20-10, so there weren't many points scored. There were 20 plus rushes by the Rams. I think there were around 20 rushes for the Seahawks. So it was just kind of a slower paced game. It's not really conducive for a lot of production from the wide receivers.
Yeah.
Outside of Cooper Kupp, of course.
That is true. We can move on to the Vikings. Kirk Cousins, 12 for 24, 87 passing yards.
Primetime Kirk Cousins is a real thing.
Yeah.
He crumbles under the big lights.
All right, so this is just a normal, I think, noon game on Sunday, so can he bounce back?
I think so. Yeah, I really do. I mean, and we like we said at the beginning of this matchup preview, we do expect this to be a high-scoring game. The Vikings like to keep their games close, and that means a lot of scoring back and forth, and that's how the Rams usually like to run their offense, is a lot of scoring and a lot of high-paced offense. So should be a good game. I think Kirk Cousins bounces back pretty well, in addition to Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook couldn't carry me. 11.1 fantasy points. I mean, you gotta love the volume, 30 touches, but...
Yeah, he got the touches, just... couldn't get it done with, didn't find the end zone, and that hurts.
Yeah, that definitely hurts him. Justin Jefferson, kind of low performance for his standard, but still not bad, 14.7 fantasy points. Adam Thielen, monitor his injury status. He's dealing with his ankle injury that he suffered a few weeks ago. He could be available for this game. KJ Osborne has not been consistent after that one game, and Conklin hasn't filled in for that role either, so... I guess if the only other option you can hope for is Thielen to just be available.
Yeah, if you're playing Osborne, you're kind of hoping to cash in on a touchdown, get lucky.
Yeah.
Kind of have a Van Jefferson stat line. Low receptions, but high yardage and at least a touchdown. So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying with there.
Yeah, and Rams defense, I expected them to be better than this, honestly. Middle, I mean, not bad, but dead center, 16th in passing yards allowed per game, and 6th in rushing yards allowed per game. That's good, but I expect them to be like top 10 and everything, but I guess not.
Yeah, I mean they've been more of a high-powered offense than a Stonewall defense.
They just got a lot of big names. Like I can name like 3 players on their defense, and that's a lot for me. So
yeah,
they got to be doing something right.
Yeah, something right.
All right, we can move on to a great matchup.
Yeah, toilet bowl.
Jaguars Jets. James Robinson tied for the most touches in a game for Robinson this season. That's not a question, even though I have a question mark there. So Urban Meyer's gone, and I think James Robinson's free again.
Yeah, it helps that Carlos Hyde was inactive for this game, obviously.
And it also helps that he didn't have his old Ohio State football coach there to play him, Carlos Hyde.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I really do believe that was a big part of it.
Yeah, we have taken part in the bashing of Urban Meyer. It's very popular nowadays, but focusing on this team moving forward, you feel better about James Robinson. He's getting a more consistent workload, and you love the matchup against the Jets this week. They are last in total yards allowed and points allowed, so lots of opportunity for players like Robinson to cash in for you again.
Yeah, the only other player I want to talk about on this team is Laquan Treadwell. We've talked about him in DFS before. 6 receptions, 57 yards, 11.7 fantasy points. Double-digit fantasy points in his past 3 games. I mean, it's been like 10, 10, 11. But is he worthy of waiver acquisition? Rostered in 0.7% of leagues. I mean, Cortland Sutton is on more teams than he is. And he shouldn't be.
He is. Here's what I would say. I think you have to be in a pretty deep league in order to consider...
He's a great DFS pick,
in order to consider Treadwell, yes. He is a good DFS option. He's been reliably cheap the past few weeks. I'll say this. I would assume that this guy might be a rookie. I haven't heard of him before.
He wasn't on the team at the beginning of the year, I don't think. Could have been undrafted.
So maybe a rookie.
Well,
no, I'm just saying that maybe he is someone that we can look to for next season to be kind of a breakout candidate. You would expect Jennifer Lawrence to...
Jennifer?
Yeah, because of the hair.
Yeah.
You would expect Trevor Lawrence to improve as a quarterback over the offseason, kind of make a second-year jump.
Yeah.
And, under a new coaching staff, you can hope that this Jaguars team will kind of get things moving in the right direction. So,
I mean, unless he's forgotten by everyone, because not many people are probably talking about him like we are, but I'm just noticing this. I don't think I'm going to make that move after getting burned by Laviska Shenault as a breakout. But, I mean, if he's literally my last pick, then so be it. I think he might be a good guy to take a chance with.
Yeah, we'll have to see. There's a lot of change that happens with every offseason, free agency and all that. So we'll pay attention. We'll keep some notes on this as we look forward to next season.
I mean, this team's going to be different with like Travis Etienne being healthy at running back. So a lot of changes.
Yeah.
All right, Jets. I'm only going to tell about Michael Carter, and he had 3 points. So,
he only had 9 touches.
Yeah, and so they're slowly reemerging back in this offense. But as we talked about, they're reintegrating. But as we talked about before, he really had his most success when Zach Wilson was not the quarterback. I do think this was mainly because it's just his first game back from injury. But until Elijah Moore returns, are you starting any Jets players?
Not really. I mean, not if you don't have to.
Yeah.
The matchup is good, so I think there's some opportunity for DFS plays. But in terms of regular fantasy, if you are in the playoffs, you probably don't roster a Jet.
Yeah. Probably not.
Yeah.
All right, we can move on to Giants-Eagles divisional matchup.
Yeah, we just saw them play a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah. I didn't add those stats, but... forgot that probably could have been a good idea. But it's been kind of a changing offense because it's almost looking like a committee between Saquon and Devontae Booker. I mean, 15 carries for Saquon for 50 yards and 8 carries for Booker and 74. And I mean, obviously he had almost double the carries, but I was looking at watching on Red Zone and I saw, because I was facing Saquon, I see Booker go on a big run. And I think it's Saquon. I'm like, oh no. But I'm like, oh, it's Booker.
Yeah.
Like, he's looking like the better runner.
Well, that's kind of been a thing with Barkley his entire career, is that when you take away those really long, those big plays, he's kind of an inefficient runner.
Yeah.
I'm not panicking necessarily any more than I would already have with rostering Barkley.
Yeah,
because this is really a 2-to-1 split still.
Yeah,
it's not creeping in on anything near Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon status where it's like a true 50-50 split.
Yeah, Booker was more efficient though.
Yeah, more efficient. I mean,
he looked better. He was more successful when he had the backfield to himself when Saquon was gone than Saquon has been at all this season.
I mean, this just reminds me of the Cowboys' backfield, which we'll talk about later. But it's a very similar situation.
That is true. Saquon getting involved in the passing game, though. 4 receptions is good. It wasn't enough to get him double-digit fantasy points. Did you see his one catch?
Yeah.
Oh, he grabbed it like it was a foam football.
Yeah.
Oh God, that was ridiculous.
Yeah, that was cool to see.
Yeah, Eagles defense, middle of the road, so don't feel really much better or worse about any of these guys. And then the wide receivers are just pass catchers are just completely unpredictable with their injury status and their performance. So
I'll say this too, referencing back to that catch. In the broadcast, one of the commentators said that's likely going to be one of the most exciting plays you'll see all weekend. And at the time, I kind of thought, really? It wasn't like a long catch. No. It was just a good catch. Yeah. But looking back on Week 15, he wasn't really all that wrong.
He predicted it.
Yeah, so it was a bad omen. Let's talk about Eagles.
Yeah, all right. Jalen Hurts, looking like a good passer, I guess. 20 for 26, 296 passing yards, only 1 passing touchdown and interception. 38 rushing yards, but 2 rushing touchdowns, so he had 27.64 fantasy points. That's fantasy QB right there, Jalen Hurts. But Miles Sanders, 18 carries for 131 rushing yards, 2 receptions, 15 yards, 16.6 fantasy points. Back-to-back games with 100-plus rushing yards. What's your confidence level in Sanders rest of the season? Before you say that, I will say Jordan Howard had 3 fewer carries at 15, 69 rushing yards. I guess Gainwell and Boston Scott just didn't see the field or were injured and weren't even available. But what's your confidence level in Miles Sanders rest of the season?
All right, so whenever it's consideration for rest of season, I like to look at the remaining schedule. Yes. So, like we said, Week 16 Giants.
Isn't it just division?
It is, yeah. Matchups? It's all division. So 17 at Washington, and then Week 18 if you're still playing. Which they will be, but they're going to be home to Dallas. So
you don't like Washington, really?
Yeah, Washington, and back in Week 15, which is the game that we're talking about, the game we're breaking down, he had the stat line that you said. So 16.5 fantasy points.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. That being said.
Can you do it again?
No, here's the biggest difference is that he's getting twice, if not 3 times. In some of these games, 4 times the amount of carries. Like back in Week 7, he had 6 carries. That might be a bad example. He got hurt that week, I think. So let's say this: back in Week 4,
he definitely was healthy.
He had 7 carries.
Yeah, he was definitely healthy that game.
Yeah. Week 13, he had 24 carries. So the difference in amount of carries he's getting, the workload that he's seeing now, they're actually using him like their lead running back. And
imagine that.
Right. Well, yards will come more often than not whenever you get a high volume of opportunities. So if that continues, you feel pretty good about him. You feel like he's going to be a solid RB2 at least. Still pretty touchdown dependent. His receiving usage it was a little bit better in the earlier in the season. It's been kind of low the past few games. But yeah, rest of season, I think you can, if he continues to get the amount of carries he's been getting, I think you can feel pretty good about starting him as an RB2.
It's funny, I forgot they were facing Washington last week. Between Hurts, Sanders, and Howard, 238 rushing yards.
Let's chalk it up to the longest week of the season.
Yeah, exactly. Devonta Smith, 3 consecutive single-digit fantasy performances. Their wide receiver one is Dallas Goedert. 7 receptions for 135 yards.
He's their top pass catcher.
Back-to-back 100-plus receiving yard games. One of them with Minshew, one of them with Hurts.
Yeah, and the common denominator being Goddard, you feel good about that.
Yeah. So I think you can trust him. I think he was position ranked 6th. We've talked about how position rank go in tight end, but I think...
Yeah.
I mean, our dad has Kittle and Goddard, and it's almost like...
Flex one of them.
Yeah, in a standard format as far as the lineup goes. Do you flex one of them? Start them both?
It depends on who he has.
Yeah, it depends on who he has.
The
but you could.
But yeah, the reality is that both of them have been performing at a very high caliber. So in terms of Eagles pass catchers, it's Dallas Goedert, and I don't really want anything to do with anyone else.
Yeah. Pretty good matchup, though. 25th in total yards allowed per game is what the Giants are. So move on to my last game. I'll talk about a rematch between Bills-Patriots. Any prediction from the Patriots fan?
It's going to be a tougher game because we can't rely on the weather helping us out.
Well, assuming you can't. I guess it's New England, but
yeah,
I guess I haven't heard that it's been like that.
It's not going to be as windy. There's no possible way.
It'd be pretty hard to do that. I mean, the snow would be more conducive to a football game than I guess the way the conditions.
The wind is such an erratic element. But I'll say this. You like that it's at home. You like that Damian Harris is getting a little bit more healthy. So that's good. He was practicing this week. Kendrick Bourne not being available necessarily hurts. But, I mean, the Bills are kind of down on some players. Cole Beasley's not going to be available. Emmanuel Sanders is iffy this week. So, it could go either way. I'm rooting for the Patriots, obviously. Let's go ahead and start breaking down the Bills.
Yeah, I mean, you're not benching Josh Allen, and it's hard to pull. I'll pull a lot from Week 13 when they face each other. It's hard to pull from that game as far as passing is concerned. But, I mean, he had 20.8 fantasy points last week. Yeah. Is that what you're making the face for? But you're really benching Allen?
I'm making the face because we talked about it when we recapped this Week 13 matchup that there's no takeaway from this game. That game happened in a bubble, we'll say, because of the weather.
Yeah. So no, okay. I want to focus on Devin Singletary.
Okay.
Because that should have been someone that had an opportunity to do something.
Zach Moss must have done something.
He must have done something egregious.
Because he's been inactive or a healthy scratch a couple of times in the past few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Devin Singletary is emerging as the lead runner. Besides Josh Allen, and in this game, it was a clear division. 22 carries for Singletary. He had 86 yards and a touchdown.
But he didn't do it in Week 13. And I think Zach Moss was a healthy scratch that game, or wasn't. I don't think he was playing.
Moss didn't play in Week 13, but the trouble was that the Bills were playing from behind in that game the entire time. And Allen just tried to put the entire team on his back in that game.
This is a strong defense. I know that they just faced Taylor, but...
The real question, and you asked it, can you trust Singletary? Yeah. I'd like to see it from him again.
Yeah.
And it's...
You hate to say that at this stage of the fantasy season, but...
Well, you didn't really... Singletary didn't get you to the playoffs.
No.
So this is kind of a bonus question that we're really asking. Because if you have Singletary and you made the playoffs, it's in spite of him, not because of him.
Yeah.
So I'll say this. For DFS, might be a good play. I think he's pretty cheap this week. And the Patriots defense is not as good. They're dominant against the pass.
Oh yeah, they are not great about the rush.
But yeah, I mean they're not great against the run. So it's a weakness in their defense.
I mean they got to rush it with somebody. So
yeah, and it's not always going to be Allen, especially with his ailing injury. But Singletary. We're kind of rambling about him. I would say that it's more of a DFS consideration than a fantasy consideration.
Yeah. Gabriel Davis, DFS monster last week. 5 receptions for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. But yeah, I'm not going to go over too many other stats. I'll just ask you this. Who do you think will step up in Beasley's absence? Because he's for sure out because he's unvaccinated.
It's really tough to root for any of these guys against New England, and I'm not saying that because I'm biased. I'm saying that because their defense is so legit.
Yeah.
I really think it's a downgrade for all of these guys that are healthy and available. Obviously, you feel the best about Diggs just because he's the most talented of the group.
Yeah.
I think that Gabriel Davis and Dawson Knox have the most touchdown upside among regular guys that are there. Diggs is probably going to draw the shadow of J.C. Jackson, and that's not ideal for him.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, I think it's going to be Knox or Gabe Davis in terms of people stepping up for Bees' absence.
Oh, Gabe, shortened from Gabriel. More personal with him now.
Yeah, I feel like I was advocating for him before.
That was Gabe.
I was advocating for him before he was ever on your radar. So
you were very early on him. I did see something on Twitter. I'm about to move on from the Bills, but advocating for Isaiah McKenzie because he fits into the slot, which is where Beasley usually is. I'm not going to advocate for him, but if he ends up having a good game, maybe I saw that tweet for a reason. That's all I'm going to say. So
I had to think about who Isaiah McKenzie even played for before.
Yeah.
So
Bills wide receiver.
Maybe a DFS dart throw, but definitely not a playoff consideration.
That is true. We can move on to the Patriots. Damian Harris monitors injury status with his hamstring that he actually got injured against the Bills, where he had one big run. I don't think it was it from that play? I don't think so. It was?
I think it was.
It was a big explosive play. He pulled his hammy right there.
Exploded his hamstring.
And then Ramondre Stevenson didn't capitalize on the backfield being his own last week, but he had 24 carries in week 13 when Harris went down. But can you trust either of them if they're both healthy?
If they're both healthy, it's a tough matchup. I think you value Harris more if he's healthy than Stevenson. I mean, that's what we've seen from that backfield this entire season. Stevenson's really only come on when Harris has been unavailable. So you give the edge to Harris, but it's an issue of them eating into each other's fantasy value.
And then is Stevenson startable if Harris is out, in your opinion?
Startable, but you have to lower expectations based on the matchup.
And then we're not gonna can't pull from week 13 because 2 for 3 for Mac Jones that week
happened in a bubble.
Yeah, and Kendrick Bourne on the COVID list, as you said, added on Monday. Do you feel better about Myers or Bourne? We keep on going back to this, but Myers.
Oh, if Bourne's healthy?
Yeah.
I choose Hunter Henry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can just skip to him. 9 receiving touchdowns this season. He had 6 receptions for 77 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. I love to see that stat line because the touchdowns allow him to boom.
That's like a real, I get what you're saying.
It's like Kittle would
It's a real stat line.
Yeah, it's a real stat line. There you
not
go.
Not just on the touchdowns.
2 for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's probably something you would do.
He has had a game like that.
But can you trust him? Is he reliable? Is that touchdown production reliable? Or
I think, we've talked about him before that you have to play him with the thought in mind. You have to be willing to accept if he doesn't score a touchdown and gets you, 6 or fewer points.
This is a step in the right direction, though.
And that's that is kind of the nature of the beast with tight ends outside of the elite 3 or 4 guys. So, if you're rolling with Henry, you should know what to expect and either reap the rewards or live with the consequences.
Yeah, and Bills defense ranks first in passing yards allowed per game and 16th in rushing yards allowed per game. So interesting rematch. Has a lot of playoff implications.
Yeah, I feel like that stat has a lot to do with like the 13 yards they gave up back in week 13, but their run defense is better than that stat leads on.
Yeah. Yeah, Fournette had like a 60-yard run. That probably hurt their totals because he ended up having a good day. Stuff like that. Harris's run. That does inflate stats a bit, but shows their weakness compared to their passing defense. But all right, you can take over with Ravens Bengals.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's start with Tyler Huntley. 35.9 fantasy points.
Wow.
Absolutely boomed back in week 15.
Against the Packers.
Against the Packers. It was a very unexpected outcome, but he had 13 carries for 73 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as 2 touchdowns through the air. He's a free agent this offseason. Where would you like to see him play next year if Baltimore doesn't re-sign him?
Broncos. They would never do that, though. They would never do that. They only pick unathletic quarterbacks. That'd be awesome. I like him. I
think it's funny that Baltimore seems to have developed a type.
Yeah, they developed Lamar Jackson Jr. And is he a rookie? I guess not, because if he's about to be...
No, he was an undrafted rookie.
Undrafted rookie.
Yeah.
What a pickup. Because I know I know he had a great performance, but in week 14 against the Bengals, I think, he had like a juke and he's like, that is literally Lamar Jackson out there. Like, I cannot. How does he get undrafted?
When you're zoomed out, it's hard to tell them apart.
It is
like
their play style. I saw something that 2 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns, like at least 2 on each side. Lamar Jackson hasn't even done that. I'm not saying he's better than Lamar Jackson, but I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the most interesting thing about this, since this is like a fill-in quarterback situation, I mean, I'll ask you, is he worth picking up as an insurance QB?
If you have Lamar, yes, I guess.
Just Lamar?
No, yes, anyone.
Yeah,
if you're not really, if your second quarterback's not seeing...
Yeah, like I think...
it just makes more sense as a Lamar manager, because Lamar
that.
goes down, you put in Huntley.
Yeah, but I mean, the way he's performed, I think he warrants being rostered. Yeah. You know, if you're not bouncing back and forth, if you're not streaming quarterbacks week after week, I think this guy needs to find your lineup.
He's a better passer than Lamar was as a rookie.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small sample size.
It is.
But yeah, it's exciting to watch, and we've talked about him enough. I mean, let's move on to the pass catchers here. Marquise Goodwin, 10 catches for 43 yards. That's an interesting stat line.
For Marquise Goodwin especially.
Or Marquise Brown, sorry.
Brown. I said it too.
Yeah.
For Marquise Brown especially.
Yes. He's had double-digit targets in 5 of his last 7. He had 14 in Week 15. But he hasn't scored a touchdown since Week 7 versus Cincinnati. So maybe a chance to bounce back there. Yeah. What's your confidence in starting Marquise Brown?
I think you trust him. I mean, before this game, he had a lot of games under his season-long average. But, I mean, you know how I am with targets. This was his first game with double-digit receptions and I think 14 targets. It's hard not to trust that, especially with his big play potential too.
Yeah.
I think that if this shows that he has a high floor, and we know what he can do as a receiver. And I love him in DFS at 5,800 personally, but I think that
there's a sneak peek for the DFS.
Yeah,
show.
I think he makes your lineup. I mean, you know how I value wide receivers.
Yeah.
And it's a guy that usually is the big play guy, and now he's getting a stat line like that. I think that's great. Underestimate him for drafts.
Does the quarterback influence your decision at all in terms of...
I guess not.
Yeah, it seems like that. Okay, let's talk about Bateman, though, on the other end of that spectrum.
Not as happy.
No touchdowns this season. In Week 15, where Huntley threw 40 passes, Bateman had 1 catch for 5 yards. No. He has had 1 reception or fewer in 2 of his last 3 games. I think he's too volatile a player to trust in the fantasy playoffs.
He's talented, just not for the rest of the season.
I think it's a player that we look at for next year.
I mean, every single fantasy analyst was loving him as someone you pick up, because I had never heard of him because he was injured the first 6 games.
Yeah.
And he showed his talent a few times, but you can't trust him this season.
Yeah, he had sparks, but nothing.
Especially with Mark Andrews doing what he's doing.
Yeah, Bateman hasn't been consistent enough to definitely not to trust in your fantasy playoffs.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Let's talk about the Bengals. Our dad would I mean,
Joe Burrow.
He loves Joe Burrow, but
for whatever reason,
he's got 1 or fewer passing touchdowns in 5 of his last 6 games. 0 passing touchdowns in Week 9, so that's included in that last 6. His only 2 rushing touchdowns on the season came during that span in Weeks 12 and 13. Here's the bright side. It's a great matchup against Baltimore. They rank 31st in passing yards allowed per game. Are you trusting Burrow to bounce back, or are you looking elsewhere at QB this week?
I'm not super confident, but I do think he will bounce back. Like, I'm not confident in what that means, but I do expect him to be reliable.
Yeah, I mean, the statistic that stands out to me is the 1 or fewer passing touchdowns in 5 of his last 6.
Unaware of that, honestly.
Yeah, and I understand the reason that you're unaware of that. For most people, I think, is because the pass catchers have not suffered. Yeah. I mean, we've seen T. Higgins and Jamar Chase kind of bounce back and forth of like who's putting up wide receiver 1 numbers, but it has been somebody week after week. But yeah, Burrow's in a bit of a slump, and I think if anything, this is the opportunity for him to bounce back.
Yeah. A big divisional matchup. I mean, that division's so close.
Yeah. Let's talk about Joe Mixon. Last week, got you 7 fantasy points. He is a single-digit scorer in 3 straight games. That was against the Chargers, which is a bad run defense. against San Francisco, which is better against the run, and then at Denver, which is a tough defense. So part of it is schedule, and part of it is he's been a little bit banged up.
I mean, going into that right before that 3-game stretch of single digits, he was looking like a top 3 fantasy running back, and now he's regressed to like why you don't usually trust him, because he does this sometimes, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
I can't bring any reason to it because he looks good whenever I see him play in those big games, and then I don't even notice him in these games.
So I've got good news and I've got bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?
Bad news.
Okay, the bad news is that Baltimore ranks first in rushing yards allowed per game. The good news is that in that span, that 3-game span, he's still averaging around 20 touches a game. So he's getting opportunities. There is an opportunity, or he's getting the workload that will allow him to succeed. He has the talent, but he's been in a slump, so much like his quarterback. Week 7 at Baltimore, Joe Mixon had 12 carries for 59 yards at a touchdown. He got you 11.9 fantasy points. Maybe, based on how he's performed lately, that would be an improvement. But I think you do need to lower expectations again for Mixon this week.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the pass catchers. Week 15, man, it was rough for these guys. Jamar Chase, 1 catch for 3 yards. T. Higgins, 2 catches for 23 yards. Don't get cute by benching these guys.
Yeah, agreed.
They're very talented, and they have been proven throughout the season to be solid options at the wide receiver. Someone who...
Nope.
Let me just get it out. Tyler Boyd had 5 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. He got 20.6 fantasy points.
Nope.
It's his first 20-plus point performance since Week 4 versus Jacksonville. He's been a double-digit scorer in 4 of his last 5 games, averaging just under 6 targets a game in that span. Is it time to trust Boyd again?
He's worth rostering, I guess. He's proven that enough, but... I mean, this disparity looks so bad because Burrow's not throwing any passing touchdowns, and he caught the sole one. So,
well, let's eliminate this past week. Let's not talk about week 15.
Well, I'm sure that's been a case a few of those times, because that stretch of him having a lot of double-digit performances has been that stretch for Burrow.
I don't think you're correct in that.
All right, well, I still don't trust him.
Okay, so you don't trust him,
no.
But I think he is kind of becoming a low-end flex. The problem is that he can burn you.
Yeah.
And he has done that.
You're an ex-Tyler Boyd owner, a fantasy manager. I mean...
Yeah, so I'm pulling up. He has not scored a touchdown besides Week 15 since Week 8.
All right, well, so that would have been a nice narrative to fit in,
but it's not
true.
No, it's not the case. He's getting targets. He's getting targeted more, and he's delivering on those. But yeah, he's a risky flex. I would say. Based on what we've seen from him earlier this season.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Chargers and Texans. Now, if you roster Austin Eckler, you'd be just drooling at the idea that Eckler's going to bounce back and get a major dub against the Texans.
Yeah.
He's on the COVID list. So I'll ask you this: Justin Jackson, he actually outcarried Austin Eckler 13-12. But Jackson had 86 rushing yards, 1 reception for 13 yards. He got 10.9 fantasy points
the Chiefs,
in
right?
Week 15, yes. Way back last Thursday.
Yeah.
Houston ranks last in rushing yards allowed per game and 31st in points allowed per game. So I'll ask you this. If Eckler is unavailable, I think it's a no-brainer that Justin Jackson is starting for your team, but it is going to be a committee. If Eckler is healthy, is the matchup too good to bench Jackson?
I think you start him. I mean, Rashad Penny in Week 14, James Robinson, Week 15. I mean, those are 2 people that have been... Well, I mean, Rashad Penny was just non-existent before that, but he was a backup role similar to Jackson. And James Robinson had one of his first inspiring performances in a long time, and I think there are other factors for that. But great matchup. No, I think you trust him if there's no Eckler.
Yeah, and if Eckler's available, what do you think?
No, I don't think there's enough to...
Okay, so you ignored the question in that response.
It's too good to bench him if Eckler's out.
Okay, but if Eckler's playing, you're not gonna trust Jackson, even though he outcarried him.
but Eckler's got too much receiving upside, and that's where all of this comes out.
So, yeah, but the question is, can they coexist, given the matchup?
Not comfortably in the fantasy playoffs. I mean, if you're RB2, if you've been riddled with injuries, I mean, our dad has Hilliard as his RB2 right now. I'd take Jackson over him.
Okay.
It's a very low bar. I think
there's a consideration to make
there.
Sure.
Go pick him up.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway. Yeah. So we'll move on from there.
Yeah.
Mike Williams, 3 catches for 49 yards. He got you 7.9 fantasy points. Another disappointing night for Williams. At this point in the season, we're all too familiar with that. Houston's middle of the road in passing yards allowed. How confident are you starting Williams if you roster him?
No, you can't be. Can't be too confident. Like we said last week, if you got to play the boom potential as the underdog, go for it. But same analysis last week.
Yeah, it didn't pay off for you in week 15.
With where you drafted him, you were so happy for a good stretch of the season early on, but you drafted him late, so you should have people better than him that are more reliable. So I would choose those guys in the playoffs if you're in a good position with the rest of your team.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. All right, on the other side of the matchup, Texans. Here's my note. You're starting Brandon Cooks, who last week got you 7 catches for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns, 29.2 fantasy points. He was placed on the COVID list as we're recording this on Wednesday. So they have updated. Yeah, not good. They have updated the COVID protocols, and I'm not super familiar with them yet. I'm still kind of learning them as they come out. But he is not ineligible to play this game on Sunday yet. So if he is available, I think, it's a no-brainer. You're starting Brandon Cooks because of what he can do, like you saw in Week 15. If he's unavailable, I don't think there's really a next man up that you feel good about. And I think you just fade the Texans.
I mean, you've taken long shots with Nico Collins and Brevin Jordan.
DFS.
Yeah, in DFS.
Yeah.
But those should be the next guys up theoretically, but they're still long shots, and that just shows you how much it falls off after Brandon Cooks.
Yes, I agree with that. All right, let's talk about Buccaneers-Panthers. So, unfortunately, there are a lot of injuries to monitor here. Chris Godwin had an ACL injury. His season is over.
Entire season. At first, they were just saying regular season, right?
Yeah, initial reports were saying MCL and that he would be placed on IR likely and return for the playoffs. But
that hurts a lot.
It has come out that it's an ACL injury that does kind of knock them down a little bit in terms of Super Bowl pushes, but you never bet against Brady.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. Leonard Fournette, hamstring injury. The reports around this are kind of mixed. So I have heard from sources that he is likely out for the rest of the regular season. I think that kind of goes along with what Bruce Arians said, where he compared it to last season, where Ronald Jones went down with injury and Fournette picked up the slack and kind of took the job from him. And he says that it's Ronald Jones' time to step up and handle the lead duties and kind of pick up the slack, so to speak. Tampa Bay signed Le'Veon Bell. I think that's noise more so than news, because Le'Veon's been passed around the league so many times at this point that
Le'Veon and AB back together. Just realize that
might be good for the locker room.
Yeah.
Jeez. So I don't think that I really don't think you're considering picking up Le'Veon Bell, especially at this point in the season. I think this is more NFL news than fantasy news.
I mean, at the Ravens, he was outperformed by Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman. So I trust Ronald Jones to take it over. I mean, going into drafts this year, Ronald Jones was projected to be a better pick than Leonard Fournette. So you can't just forget about him and just think that Le'Veon is going to strike gold because he's in the same backfield as Brady now. Like, no, I don't trust Le'Veon at all.
Yeah, he's a less competent pass catcher out of the backfield than Fournette is. But I think people who are new to fantasy or it's been a long season that you may forget that Ronald Jones was pretty legit. He was a top 10 running back at points last season. Yeah. So not a bad fill-in for the Buccaneers. That being said, I think that I think you're making an effort to pick up Ronald Jones in your leagues. Not necessarily for this matchup in Week 16, but Week 17 they're at the Jets, and that is a great opportunity there if you can pick him up. And then lastly, let's talk about Mike Evans' hamstring injury. He's considered week to week, but could still play Sunday. So we'll be monitoring that going into the weekend. I'll ask you, is there any interest in other Tampa Bay pass catchers not named Rob Gronkowski or Antonio Brown?
No, not really this week. Not with fans, not of playoffs. I mean, Tyler Johnson, I think I like him more than Scotty Miller. That's the two options you have listed here. But
yeah, Brashad Perriman's coming off of the COVID list. He had that big game-sealing touchdown last week, I believe.
Against the Bills.
Yeah. So there are some options there. I think it's going to be, kind of a committee to fill in for the void, especially if Evans misses too. But I think these are DFS guys. These aren't fantasy considerations.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Carolina ranks second in passing yards allowed per game and total yards allowed per game. More middle of the road in rushing yards allowed and points allowed. So I really don't expect Tom Brady to lay consecutive eggs. So I think he's going to come back and play this pretty tough.
He hadn't done that since 2006, so I don't think he'll do it back-to-back weeks.
And I'm going to pull up real quick because actually they haven't played Carolina yet. They play Carolina again in Week 18.
Oh, wow.
So no comparison to draw there. Let's talk about the Panthers now on the other side. Chuba Hubbard. 8 carries for 40 yards and 1 catch for 1 yard to get you 5.1 fantasy points. Cam Newton outcarried him 15-8.
Oh, that's funny.
Cam got the rushing touchdown as well. Tampa Bay ranks 3rd in rushing yards allowed per game. This is all leading up to what I had said a couple weeks ago, which was that Chuba Hubbard's rest of season schedule made him pretty unusable for rest of season after they played, who was it, the Falcons? Yeah, the Falcons. Yeah. So, and he really didn't have that great of a game there. So the reality is that he lacks upside as long as Cam is quarterback. They're talking about Sam Darnold playing at some point. But even in goal line situations, I wouldn't be surprised if they subbed out Darnold and put Cam in to do Cam things at the goal line. So it's a tough matchup. You should bench Hubbard if you can. And that's pretty much it in terms of that. DJ Moore is a game time decision, so I'll ask you, how confident are you starting him if he's healthy?
I think he's at least a flex.
Yeah, I mean the trouble is that Cam Newton seemingly can't throw anymore.
Yeah, but I mean DJ Moore still is getting double-digit fantasy production, and then we know his ceiling. With his talent, I mean, it's limited by the quarterback play, but...
Yeah. So, I mean, Cam was 18 for 38. He had 156 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So, the matchup is okay. Tampa Bay is easier to pass against, but I agree. I mean, Cam Newton has limited upside for his receivers and his running backs. He's a pretty selfish NFL player when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
So, things to consider there. Let's talk about Bears Seahawks. Justin Fields, he was 26 for 39, 285 passing yards. You like that? Mm-hmm. 1 passing touchdown. Not the best. No turnovers through the air. He did lose a fumble. And then he had 7 carries for 35 yards. He got you 16.9 fantasy points. Here's the good news. Seattle ranks last in passing yards allowed per game and 31st in total yards allowed. How confident would you feel streaming Fields at Seattle this week?
And we haven't talked about him yet.
It's an interesting scenario. I'll just say this for clarification. Maybe you have Taylor Heineke, who's kind of struggling to get off the COVID list, or...
I was gonna say Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott. Would you start him over them? And we're about to talk about both of them later, but I'll put the question on you.
Okay.
Because I think I would, honestly.
I would start Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's been really bad.
Yeah.
Dak Prescott, I feel I'm not ready to give up on Dak if Fields is my replacement.
It's fair. It is fair. I mean, yeah.
You like the matchup, but it's the touchdown equity that Fields seems to lack.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get one on the ground.
Yeah.
So that's the limiting aspect for that. David Montgomery, 18 carries, 60 rushing yards, 5 catches for 23 yards, lost a fumble. He get you 11.3 fantasy points. He had great volume, 20-plus touches, but he is still a touchdown-dependent RB2. And Seattle ranks 7th in points allowed per game. So not a lot of opportunities to score for him. I think you're going to have to lower expectations a little bit. If he can get high yardage totals, which he really hasn't a lot this season, we looked it up before the show. He's got 2 games over 100 rushing yards, and I think his other season high was around 90. So he's kind of averaging around 60 rushing yards a game. At that rate, you kind of need a lot of catches or a touchdown to break that RB2 ceiling.
Yeah, that is true.
With the Seahawks, Russell Wilson, like we talked about, not good. 4.25 fantasy points, roughly. We thought he was getting back on track. He had 3 consecutive weeks at or around 20 fantasy points. This is his worst performance since returning from injury. Do you feel any better? And you've already answered this with your question.
I'd go Fields, honestly.
Yeah, so the question was, do you feel any better starting him versus Chicago, or are you looking elsewhere if you can? I agree. I think you should look elsewhere. Chicago is kind of middle of the road, but Wilson's he's not looking himself. I think this is an injury that's affecting him in a more significant way than we anticipated.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's affecting his pass catchers, especially DK Metcalf. He had 6 catches for 52 yards, 11.2 fantasy points, and this is with no Tyler Lockett to compete with. DK hasn't scored a touchdown since the Week 9 bye, so he hasn't scored a touchdown since Week 8.
The way that's worded makes it seem like it was during the bye, like in practice.
Yeah, maybe it was. Maybe the last time he scored was off the field, because it certainly hasn't been on the field in quite a long time. When Lockett returns, personally, he's the only pass catcher on this team that I'm trusting, because in Wilson's return, Lockett has thrived, and Metcalf has continued to struggle. So I'll ask you, how confident are you in DK this week?
I agree with that same analysis on Lockett being the only one you can trust.
So that means that you're going to bench him?
Yeah. We've been... that's gotta go into my mind as we ask that question every week, that maybe that is the answer.
Yeah.
I had DK last year and I was riding high and I loved it, but not the same this year. And I think it's not his fault, but disappointing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about running backs for Seattle. So
it was a fluke.
We thought you were the one, Rashad Penny.
We thought.
He had 11 carries for 39 yards and 2 catches for 5 yards. He got you 6.5 fantasy points. DJ Dallas, 8 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, he got vultured by Dallas too.
3 catches for 11 yards, 14.2 fantasy points. It seems more like Carroll is using the hot hand approach, as we saw a 2-headed committee handle the RB touches in Week 15. And Alex Collins has been removed from the COVID list, so that's one more theoretical mouth to feed. You can't feel confident in Penny. I know it was a low scoring game against the Rams in Week 15, but I don't see how you can roll out Penny with any sense of confidence this week. Based on what he did.
I don't think you drop him. I mean, unless you have a good chance of getting like Ronald Jones, for example.
Yeah. Well, you probably don't necessarily have to drop him for Jones, but
yeah, I'm just saying like that's a 1-to-1.
Because at this point in the season, running backs that have any sort of potential are pretty valuable.
Yeah.
So
that's what I say. Unless he is your one to drop for him, I would probably keep him.
Yeah,
it's just very late in the season
keep Penny, but I don't think you can. I don't think you can start him with any real confidence this week based on how he performed. All right, let's move on to Broncos against the Raiders.
I think I've been looking at this because I'm like a Broncos fan or whatever. They basically need to win out to make the playoffs.
Yeah, keep dreaming.
Beating the Bengals would have really helped them. They would have actually maybe had a somewhat realistic chance.
Well, along those same lines, we're getting to a point where you can only reliably start the running backs.
Yeah.
Javonte Williams got you 12.1. Melvin Gordon got you 7.1. And those were kind of like the leading scorers on the team. Teddy Bridgewater with a concussion will not play. I guess that means Drew Lock gets the start. He's the next man up, presumably.
Gross.
Yeah, and that's a Broncos fan saying that. So I don't think there are any pass catchers you can trust in this matchup. I mean, nope. It was not a good performance when Lock filled in for Bridgewater. It was not a good performance when Lock was the regular starter. So I understand paying your wide receivers, but where's the quarterback?
When that was announced, it's like they're like
Aaron Rodgers. We have some guys locked in.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Maybe, and
they do. If they have a lot of talent, young talent on that team. They just need a quarterback.
Yeah,
the defense is great. They're not that far away from being a. I'm just saying.
I know you've said sometimes this season they're a quarterback away.
They are. They're not that far away. I mean,
I don't disagree. When
Peyton Manning was there, I was looking at the records. They're like 12-4 all 4 of those seasons. Obviously, Peyton Manning is
one of the best
quarterback.
Yeah, one of the best.
But I mean, that wasn't like necessarily his prime. He was doing what he needed to do, and that's what allowed the team to get there. But
and they had a strong defense in those years.
A lot of people said it was the defense carrying that team, anyways.
Well, we saw what happened when Seahawks, right? When they got crushed?
Yeah, when they got crushed. But then it was their defense that allowed them to beat the Panthers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Cam Newton didn't go after the fumble. All kinds of things.
That is true.
Selfish moments.
I saw that recently. That really is true.
Yeah. All right, well, basically the takeaway is it's a bad situation in Denver. The running backs eat into each other's value. It's a true committee, 50-50 split there. The Raiders rank 25th in rushing yards allowed and 27th in points allowed, so there is some upside there with the running backs. But in terms of Drew Lock being the starter and any pass catchers, I think you have to avoid them, and that includes Jerry Jeudy, who so far, as long as he's been healthy, has been the most reliable. If you can avoid it, I think you should. And I think Carson agrees with that.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Lock probably... I mean, his upside probably is similar to Bridgewater's, but a much lower floor.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the other side with the Raiders players. Denver ranks top 10 in all defensive categories.
Woohoo.
Like we were saying. Most importantly, second in points allowed per game at 16.5.
Woohoo. I think Patriots are first.
The takeaway...
we like some two good defenses.
The takeaway here is lower expectations across the board. We do know, as of Wednesday, that Darren Waller has not practiced still. And then I've got some Week 6 stats where the Raiders were at Denver. Hunter Renfrow, coming off of a bad game in Week 15. In Week 6, he had 3 catches for 36 yards.
Locked up.
Very similar to his Week 15 stat line. Darren Waller, if he plays this week, here's something that you may come to expect. 5 catches for 59 yards, 10.9 fantasy points. And among all the guys, Josh Jacobs, 16 carries, 53 yards, and a touchdown. He got you 15.2 fantasy points. He's the one that I feel the best about.
I'd start all 3 of them.
You would start all 3 of them.
I'm a Renfrow believer. I think you have to be a Waller believer unless you lucked out with your next tight end, and I think Jacobs is safe enough to be a flex.
Okay, but lower expectations still. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, of course. Okay. I mean, they didn't. None of them had amazing games. I don't think that they're gonna boom necessarily, but I think you gotta trust them.
Okay.
Enough to be in your starting lineup.
Interesting. Okay, I don't necessarily disagree.
Yeah.
Especially with Waller.
Yeah.
I think you may be able to afford avoiding Renfrow. based on where you got him, because he was likely a waiver pickup.
I know. He might have been on the waivers on that week, honestly.
Probably. And then Josh Jacobs, I think you're starting him because running backs are hard to come by.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Steelers-Chiefs. Kansas City ranks 28th in passing yards allowed per game and 24th in total yards allowed per game. They are middle of the road against the run and 9th in points allowed per game. Najee Harris, we talked about him earlier, just a real stinky game. 12 carries, 18 yards, 2 catches for 8 yards, 4.6 fantasy points. This is his third single-digit scoring game of the season. Like we said, don't get cute. You can't bench him against the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. No, he's been too good. He's been too reliable.
We saw what Justin Jackson did.
Exactly. So yeah, don't get cute. Najee Harris will bounce back. I'm not worried about him. Chase Claypool. Here's a fun fact for you. Yeah, I see you're squinting, looking at the notes here. 0 catches, 12 receiving yards. 1 carry for 7 yards. He got 1.9 fantasy points. So
explain yourself.
No, here's how it worked. He was targeted twice in that game. The way that he got those receiving yards, and I'm throwing up air quotes, is that it was off of a lateral. So I don't remember who caught the ball. I think it may have...
I saw that play.
Yeah, it may have been Deontay that caught it and then chucked it back to Claypool. And then he ran for a first down. So that's how he got his yardage through the air, we'll say.
Oh, so you're telling me if that was Deontay, if he just didn't throw it back, he could have had double-digit fantasy points? He can transition to that?
Yeah, good transition.
That hurts my heart.
Deontay Johnson, his first single-digit scoring game by 0.2.
The game wasn't even over for me for fantasy purposes, but I knew that it was not looking good if my boy...
Not your week.
Nope, I knew it was I was over. It was done.
Yeah, 5 catches for 38 yards, 1 rush for 10 yards. The way that they're letting their receivers get carries is weird because it's just like 1 carry a game. I don't know what the point is.
When they have Najee. I don't know.
Either way, you're not getting cute with Deontay. You're not benching him. He's been too reliable.
Still an incredible floor.
Like I said, his first single-digit scoring game, and it was by 0.2 points.
Yeah.
So you're not worried about him. On to the Chiefs. The way that these guys performed in Thursday, this is a reinforcing the idea you start your studs in the playoff. Huge games for Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce. They all did amazing things. Kelce, I believe, is on the COVID list.
I think Hill is too? No, it might just be Kelce. I'm thinking of a tweet that I'm going to show you after this that if anyone can somehow find it, it's like a fake email. It's hilarious. But
okay. So we'll monitor that heading into the weekend. You'll know this is the last game on Sunday before the primetime game. So you'll have information on that before in order to adjust if necessary. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, though, 9 carries for 32 yards. This is like a Miles Sanders early season stat line. 9 carries, 32 yards, 2 catches for 18 yards, getting 9 fantasy points in a game where there were points upon points upon points. And a really good matchup against the Chargers. Pittsburgh, another good matchup, ranks 31st in rushing yards allowed per game. Is the matchup too good to bench CEH if you roster him?
Yeah, I don't think you can bench him. I mean, I've been loving this running back matchup for the Steelers for the past 3 weeks. I'm just going to add to the list. Devontae Freeman. Looked like a prime Devontae Freeman. The next week, Dalvin Cook. We know what he did. 200-plus rushing yards.
Yeah.
Deonta Foreman. Devontae Freeman's illegitimate cousin. I mean, this is a bad rushing defense, I guess. So I would say you'd have to...
You roll with it.
It's got to be at least a flex.
Bounces back. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think if you were starting CEH, you kind of knew what to expect. I think he's performed up to, or down to, rather, an expectation that I think is fitting.
I remember back with in our draft, the third-round pick. I think of my third-round pick. And I was between, Woods and CEH. What a low-stakes decision as you look back on it right now.
Robert Woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, did I make the wrong one? I don't even know. I mean,
I picked after you, so I ended up taking CEH.
It's like I don't even. This is so sad with how long Woods has already been out. I don't even know if that was the wrong decision because CEH has been out and then bad too.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the primetime game for Sunday. Washington football team against the Cowboys. So Antonio Gibson, he got a touchdown late, saved his day, kind of. 15 carries for, wait for it, 26 rushing yards, and 6 catches for 39 yards. You're happy to see the amount of catches, and this is, again, McKissick was inactive for this game, but it is promising that he seems to be getting more involved in the pass game. The troubling thing is that he rushed for 1.7 yards per carry. That's not good. So Dallas is middle of the road in rushing yards allowed. They are 6th in points allowed. If Gibson remains inefficient, this is a bad sign for him because Dallas has not been giving up a lot of points lately. That's concerning, but I think you're going to have to continue starting him just based on the amount of volume he's getting at running back. It's hard to go away from that. On the opposite end, with low volume, we've got Terry McLaurin. 2 catches for 51 yards, 7.1 fantasy points. I think the takeaway here is you lower expectations if Heineke is unavailable again. Dallas ranks 23rd in passing yards allowed per game. McLaurin's just been really up and down this season. Not the player that you thought you were drafting, we'll say. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. You have anything to add with that?
I don't really have much to add. I mean, I don't trust McLaurin. Gibson, when we were hating on him earlier on the season, saying you can't trust him, it's because he was inefficient. I do love the receptions, but no J.D. McKissick, as you said. So he's a difficult one that could burn you. But I think that he probably makes your way into your starting lineup. But
yeah, I mean, it's because of the volume, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to turn that down.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Cowboys. Washington football team ranks 30th in passing yards allowed per game. Can Dak Prescott, who last week had 37 pass attempts, he got 217 passing yards, 1 touchdown, lost a fumble, 10.5 fantasy points. He's had 3 consecutive weeks with 1 passing touchdown, a turnover ratio in those 3 games of 4 turnovers to 3 touchdowns. How confident are you in starting Dak?
I mean, I'd consider Justin Fields.
Yeah,
so
it goes back to that.
There you go.
Yeah, that's telling. He did not perform well last time he played the football team. Let me double check that. Don't want to be wrong, but I believe that's the case. Let's see, just a moment here. Bear with me.
4 to 3 turnovers.
Yeah. So at Washington in Week 14, 211 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 9.94 fantasy points. Not good. So I get it. I get it if you're out on Dak. The defensive rankings would suggest that this is a good matchup, but it's divisional, and Dak has been in a really bad slump. Let's talk about the running backs for a moment. Tony Pollard, 12 carries, 74 yards, 3 catches for 13 yards. Underperformed Zeke, who got the touchdown, was less efficient on more carries, had the same number of catches, and got 20 receiving yards. This is clearly a committee. Personally, it makes me nervous for drafting Zeke in specifically next season. But just as long as Tony Pollard's there, I think he's going to continue to eat at Elliott's workload, and that limits his upside. Pollard has more big play potential, as we've seen. He's been, consistently averaging more yards per carry, and Elliott has more touchdown upside, getting more of the goal line work. It's not, you're just shaking your head all the way through me telling you this, but
it's like I think everyone's going to be scared of Zeke next season, which could make him. I mean, if he's valued like a RB2, clearly, I don't want to have to manage him again, having him this season. But it's almost, I don't know. He's going to be a really difficult one to place.
If he doesn't get auto-drafted in your league.
Yeah, exactly. I know, because he's going to be at the top of the queue probably.
Yeah. So
I felt better about Deonta Foreman than Zeke going into last week. I think Zeke did it at 0.7 more points because of the touchdown, but that's telling.
That is an interesting take, yeah.
You got 100 rushing yards. I wasn't really wrong.
No, you're not wrong. And Zeke has been pretty inefficient with his carries this season. So
started both of them, so whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, that's just something you to consider moving forward. I don't think Zeke really got you to the playoffs. So
no.
Are you benching him at any point this season?
He's so weird. I think his touchdown to upside makes him
where you have to start him.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because that's a really weird thing for running backs to have. Just such clear touchdown, reliable upside. Yeah, I think you just have to.
Okay, let's talk about the pass catchers briefly, and then we'll move on to our last matchup. CeeDee Lamb, 11 fantasy points. Amari Cooper, 2.8. Michael Gallup, 6.2. And Dalton Schultz, the guy that I said was on the outs, got 20.7 fantasy points. It is important to note that Schultz got the touchdown. His day would look similarly mediocre, maybe not relative to Cooper, but relative to Lamb, if he hadn't scored. I'll ask you this. Who among these pass catchers are you going to continue starting while Dak works through his slump? Because you can't bench CeeDee Lamb.
No, so I would only say Lamb. I think you can bench Cooper. I think that, Gallup was fringe anyways, so I don't think you can trust him until Dak gets back in a groove, and there's not much time left. And Schultz, you can't trust that. In week 14, he had one catch.
So he was 8 for 8 in terms of
tight end,
targets. Yeah, you have to always remember that tight ends are valued differently. I think, that's a very similar stat line to Hunter Henry, and you were all over Hunter Henry with his stat line.
Yeah.
So
it's because he was always in the notes every week because he'd have touchdowns. Schultz has just literally been 0 or
the hard
this.
Thing about Schultz, the reason I said he was on his way out in terms of this receiving core was that he got one catch last week, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. It's like 1 for 7 or something.
Yeah.
1 for 7 yards.
Yeah. So, I agree. CeeDee Lamb, you have to continue starting, and you're going to bench Cooper, Gallup, and
I guess not Schultz.
Not Schultz.
In a tight end league.
Okay.
I think you have to do Cooper and Gallup,
yeah.
though. Cooper hasn't had a big game in a long time, so I don't think he can burn you. Obviously
he certainly can, but based on how Dak is underperforming, it's difficult to. I agree. You can't roll him back out after that.
I feel for the team in the other semifinal that had Jamar Chase, Amari Cooper, and then an injured Thielen. You would have thought that those two guys would have been able to pick up the slack, but they did not last week.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the last game of the slate. Dolphins on the road to face the New Orleans Saints. Here's what I'll say. Duke Johnson.
Yes.
Duke Johnson had a big game.
Hometown, Miami, native, I found out, so that's really cool.
Yeah. Pretty sure he went to the U.
Oh, wow.
Might be wrong about that, but either way, 22 carries, 107 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, which I think is the first for his career, and then 1 catch for 20 yards. He got you 25.7 fantasy points if you were bold enough to start him.
I saw in DFS, which obviously that's different, but I feel like it's got to be even lower in regular fantasy. He was 0.88%.
Rostered. Yeah, started.
So fantasy's got to be even lower than that because those are people just punting at the price.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, there's deeper leagues too, but either way. He was signed to the Dolphins' active roster after a big day against the Jets. I think this is a bigger NFL story than a fantasy story because their rest of season schedule is really rough. New Orleans this week, and then at Tennessee, one of the toughest run defenses that have emerged lately. And then New England's not horrible, but that's week 18. So
I think this hurts Gaskin more than it sheds any light on Duke Johnson. There's no possible way this was their game plan going into the game. He just was hot, and they're like, keep feeding him.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is that I'm avoiding all running backs from this team rest of season if I can.
Yeah, hurts Gaskin more than it helps Johnson, I would agree.
Yeah. Jalen Waddle, I don't believe he's been elevated off the COVID list yet, so we'll monitor that. Devontae Parker, 4 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown, 16.8 fantasy points. Still the most reliable pass catcher besides Waddle. And then just a small footnote here, Will Fuller, not expected back this season. His season stats.
How dare you put his season stats after like 2 games, maybe?
His season stats were 4 catches on 8 targets for 26 yards.
And he sat on my IR spot all year, and I probably dropped him about 3 times, but worth it.
It's I don't know what else to say besides maybe next year. New Orleans ranks middle of the road in passing yards allowed and total yards allowed, 4th in points allowed. Devontae Parker and maybe Mike Gesicki and obviously Waddle if he's healthy, but that's kind of the big takeaways from this team.
Yep.
And then on to the Saints. I've got very few notes here. Taysom Hill, finally disappointed as a starter. He got you 9.5 fantasy points. Inefficient throwing, very little rushing production, 33 yards on 11 carries. Miami is middle of the road in all defensive categories. Do you think Taysom Hill bounces back this week? Under the big lights on Monday night.
I think he does. I mean, we saw what he did under the big lights Thursday night against the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. 4 interceptions and still managed to have a good game because of his rushing upside.
Yeah.
His rushing upside just too good to pass up on.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
literally too good to pass up on because of the way he plays.
It was a horrible game between the Saints and the Buccaneers. The final score was 9-0.
Yeah.
So
it's better than Brady, fantasy point wise.
Yeah, if Brady had gotten 33 rushing yards, they would have been close.
Something would have been really up if Brady got 33 rushing yards.
Yeah, they would have done like some kind of fake play. Let's wrap this up, though. Mark, I'll ask you this last thing, and I know what you're going to say, but I got to ask it. Marquez Callaway, 6 catches, 112 yards, 17.2 fantasy points. Is this something or nothing?
Nothing. I mean...
Say it louder for the...
Nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is someone that thought that this could be a good flyer going into the season because he'd have to be their de facto number 1 with Michael Thomas being out. He's had that role all season.
And has done very little with it.
People would expect that's performance on a more regular basis if they were actually going to invest in him on the fantasy team. I'm still looking for more Lil Jordan Humphrey performances because whenever I saw his name pop up on the screen, I was like, no way. And that is the most exciting thing out of the Saints pass catchers.
All right, well, look that up if you haven't seen that already. That's a fun little fact right there for you. We're going to wrap it up here. If you listened through the end or if you just jumped around and you happened to stumble upon this ending, thank you for listening. We will be back during this holiday week on Saturday as normal for news and DFS. Carson's shrugging, but it's going to happen.
All right.
So we're going to get some good content out for you guys, and we will talk to you soon.
Peace out.